So title has an opening and closing tag, unlike other meta, and it doesn't even have a meta tag. This is because this is something that can load in our head. One of the elements that can load inside of this head object. You can see that when we hover over meta, can't be expressed through title, base link, style, and script. Title is a specific tag. So we close it out here. Because if we didn't, and we closed it out here, you can now see that this page doesn't load at all. This text that I had, this test heading doesn't load. And you can try this yourself, of course. But it now pops up entirely in here. Test title, head body, this is the test heading. Because I closed it after everything. So now it's thinking, the page is thinking, this must be the title. Everything inside of this tag has to do with our title. So we want to close it right when we're done with whatever we're done defining it as. So this is the basic head of your document. We're going to add more stuff to it over time. A lot more stuff. But right now, this is what we're worried about. We're worried about meta tags and how we can scale the page. We don't really care about this right now because we're not going to develop for mobile first with our website. We're just going to develop a static page at 1920 by 1080 resolution. So if you're not working in 1920 by 1080, anything that we do with CSS, you're going to need to adapt to it and make the changes so that it works on your size of screen. Maybe you'll need to make any values less or more, but we'll get to that. So we have our meta tags and our title, which is defining what Google looks for. So next we have our body element. So I'm just going to hover over it. You can read it. This represents the content of the document. So anything that we load on our page, on our website, is going to be put in the body tag. Anything that we want to see as our main portion of content will be in our body tag. Now, I'm going to say this now because it will come up later, is that this doesn't mean that everything on the page is loaded through the body tag. There are actually some elements that we might do outside of the body tag, such as there is an argument that can be made for not having a tag called header in the body tag. Now what header is with the example of this Denver Home About Us blog content, this white bar with all of their text in it is considered a header. It's a top level element, so it always sits at the very top of the page, and has functions that tie into the page, but they act on their own. You can see About Us brings us to a specific part of the page, but it's not specifically working with just About Us. It's working with everything: home, services, About Us, project, clients, blog, contact. So there's an argument that's been made for a long time that header could sit outside of body tag. Now, I have made the problem multiple times of not keeping consistent with where I put my header tag. In here, you will likely see that my header is inside of my body tag. But with a recent project, I actually had it sitting outside. Now, the way we can tell whether this is a good idea or not, so if we put our header tag and we put an H1, and you should be doing this too, is that this is our header. So you don't have to update your page, but you can see that this is our header. If you want to, you would click Open Live. If you're not seeing the Open or the Go Live option down here on your blue bar or whatever color your bar is, if you don't see this, you can right-click in the document and select Open with Live Server, and it'll run the same function. So we see our header, and this is our test heading. Our header is outside of our body. Let's do this. Let's copy all of this. You can Control A and Control C, or you can select it all and Control C, or right click and copy. And we're going to go to a page called HTML Validator. And we want the validator.w3.org. This is a validation service for HTML. This tells us whether our HTML is proper, whether what we're doing is right and that if we have no errors or not. So let's go to this website and we're going to go to validate by direct input. Now we have other options, URI. So this is our address. If we had a live server, we could post it here and get our document outline. Also do file upload. So we could upload our index.html file and put it in here. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do it by direct input because we can just copy and paste what we've done into here. So we have more options. We're not going to worry about this. We'll just have it detect automatically and set it to HTML. We're not using XHTML. We don't need the source. We don't need to validate error pages. So let's go ahead and check this out. So we can see now we have an error. Start tag body is seen, but an element of the same type was already opened. Now, what does that mean? Let's hover over our header tag. It represents the introductory content of its nearest ancestor's sectioning content or sectioning root element. Okay. It represents the introductory content for our root element. Now, our root is whatever our top level element is. So, for example, our body tag is a root element because it contains a bunch of code that doesn't load properly unless it's inside of the body tag. Our head tag is a root element because we need to put our meta tag here so that the internet recognizes that this is meta that doesn't load on anywhere else on the page. That isn't supposed to load unless it's in a head tag. So our head is considered a root element. HTML is a root element, otherwise none of this would load. And doc type is not a root element because it's just defining what this document actually is. So under that lines is that header is also considered a root element because it holds stuff that isn't supposed to properly load unless there's anything unless it's specifically put inside of header. In this case, it'll be our navigation stuff. But because header's a root element, but also not a root element, it's looking for its next recent, highest root element. In this case, it's reading HTML. But that gives us an error because header acts the same way as body, but it needs an element, a root element as well. It needs an element, something that it can look up to and say, yep, I'm the header for this piece of code. We don't want that with HTML. With the HTML tag, we're saying that everything inside of this is hypertext markup language. So we're getting this error because HTML, even though it's a root element, we're not supposed to treat it like that. We're supposed to treat it as it's just saying that we're a website. So the next thing to look at is start tag body is seen. So it knows that the body tag is here, obviously, but an element of the same type was already open. Well, we know that header works the same way as body. It functions the same way as body. It's a root element that contains other stuff. So what this validator is saying is that, hey, we have a problem here. We have two things that are working the exact same, that are acting the same way, but we don't want that. We want just one big root element. We want one big element that says we start here and then we go down. Now, this error, it's an error, but it doesn't often cause a lot of problems because header acts like body. They function the same way. So if you were developing and you accidentally forgot, you would load up your page and you would see there's nothing wrong here. This is a test heading. If I put my header back in, there's nothing wrong here. You can see our header loads. You wouldn't tell until you go to the validator and see, oh, okay, there's two root files that are trying to take full control. So in this case, we know it's header. So we put it inside of the body. Now, you'll see nothing changes. Not a single thing. But if we go ahead and copy our stuff again. So we either select it all in Control C or Control A in Control C. And we go back up and we get rid of all of it, either copying in Control V or Control A and Control V. And we recheck it out. We don't have an error. That's because we moved our header inside of our body. So our body is saying, I'm the main piece. I'm the proponent that loads. You're going to put everything inside of me, and I'm going to load it all up. And the server's going to say, yep, okay, this is the starting tag. Let's load it all sequentially now, in order. The header was saying before, I'm the main piece. You're going to load everything inside of me first. But then the body's still on the page and saying, wait, hold up. I work the exact same way. So I want to load up everything as well. So the way the server is going to react is going to say, okay, let's look here. We have 2 tags that work the exact same. So I know how to load both of these, but header's first. So I'm going to load header first and then everything else inside of it. And I'm going to look for where it closes. And then it says, great, header's done loading. What's next? Body tag, you work the same way. I'm going to load you next. I'm going to load everything inside of you. But it's still improper because it shouldn't have to look at 2 elements like that. It shouldn't have to look for 2 top level pieces of code and load them individually. You should just have 1 top level piece of code and load it all right away. Now, you're going to see here that if I put the body inside of header, again, functionally, it works the exact same. Now, I will possibly get an error. I might not get an error. I get a ton of errors. Same element was already opened. Same type element. So we know that that's the header. We know that that's an error. The end tag for body was seen, but there are unclosed elements. I don't know why that's happening because that's not true. The header is supposedly unclosed, even though we have a closing tag. It's on end tag after the body. So, of course, now we know why all this is happening. Nothing is supposed to close after our body tag except for our HTML. Because the body is always considered a top level element. So we can't put the closing body tag inside of the header because it is the root. It is always the last stop for last start and stop, the first start and the last stop for all of our content. So when the header tag closes outside of it, we know that functionally the header works the same as the body, but we know also from before that it needs a parent still. It needs to be loaded by something. In this case, we're loading it through our body. And we didn't get that closing error before because we closed our header before we closed our body tag. So again, the old way could work. 100% it could work. But you'll still see that error and it's still considered improper. And again, I'm guilty of doing it improperly loads of times. But it doesn't affect much, but you should still do it this way, where you have your body tag as your main content for the document loaded over your header, and your header loaded inside of it. So that's the explanation for how to load content. So what is a header? So a header is the top level element for your page. It's always going to be something that loads up here at the very top. So going back to this is your header again. It's always sitting at the top of the page. It should always be the first thing loaded in to your website. So we start with header. Header typically contains a group of introductory or navigational aids. When the nearest ancestor sectioning content or sectioning root element is the body element, then it applies to the whole page. So we're going to put our links in here. So when we click on something, these are all links. We want to click on them and go somewhere else, either on the page or to a different page entirely. So we would put that in our header. So we have our header tag. We're not going to put anything inside of it just yet, though, because we want to explain more important tags. Header is an incredibly important tag. And we want to keep that train going with a section. Now I have caps. Don't use caps for this. So we have now a section tag. we have to open and close this section because we want to put content inside of it. So what is a section tag? A section tag represents the generic section of a document or application. So a section tag is an element that represents a generic section of a document or application. A section in this context is a thematic grouping of content. Each section should be identified typically by including a heading, H1 through H6, as a child of the section element. So I should talk about what parents and children are. So it sounds a bit weird when you're talking about someone's a parent to body, or this paragraph tag is a child to the section tag. Parent tags are the tag that wraps something. So in which case, when I had an H1 tag in my header, this H1 is a child of the header. The header is the parent to anything that's inside of header. So if maybe I have something else, maybe I have another tag in here called the nav tag. The header is the parent to both of these two tags, and these two tags are the children to the header. It's just a word of definition. Doesn't really mean much apart from describing what that the order of tags are. So let's run over the key parts of what this section layout was. So represents a generic section of document or application. So our application or document is our HTML file. And in this case, it's inside of the body tag. So the way we're structuring our content is that we want sections that define parts of our page. So, for example, this whole thing with the scrolling images, this is a section. It's got content inside of it, some images, stuff like that. This is another section. It's a set of cards that has a lot of content that is different from this area up here, this section. Scrolling down, this is definitely a section. This is the services section with multiple pieces of content inside of it. This is not actually a section, though, and we'll get to this. But this is not a large enough piece of content to define as a section. This, though, is a section. So it's important because this is a project section. We have a ton of content related to our projects. Again, this is not a section. It's generic, but it's too generic, and it doesn't cover enough of a variety of content. You can see that projects is pretty generic. It houses everything that this person has worked on. But you can see that each project might be very specific. So one project is completely different from another. All these services are completely different from one another. But maybe this stuff is pretty similar. It all relates to the same thing. Happy people equates to total projects. Active members equates to total projects. And awards won equate to happy clients, which equate to total projects, which equates to all of this. So this is all tied together. So this isn't much of a section, more of it's a block of content that doesn't relate to anything else, but relates to itself. Likewise with this, come to our office, Denver Tech. Want to meet? Monday, Saturday 9. Where do I meet? At Denver Tech. Need assistance? Call us at what time? 9 to 7. If I want to meet them, come to their office. This all ties together itself, but you can see on the page, physically it's not large enough. Content-wise, it's not specific enough. But we move on to our clients. Now this is definitely a section. Why? Well, it's the same as the projects. Like it outlines, in this case, it's people and what they're saying. Now you can see it all looks the same, but the clients section is here because it's an important piece of the page, not only, but also because it's multiple people, and they're not saying the same thing. They're all probably saying something really nice, but we can't tell because it's Lorem Ipsum. But at the same time, they're all completely different people with completely different ideas and different relation to the company. So this is a section because it's specific enough yet to have its own area, but generic enough to be tied together. More about us. This is a section, of course. It's describing everything about this company, but it's describing multiple facets of this company. You get a quote with an image over here. how they value their stats. Again, I hate this, but whatever. And how they consider themselves. This is a section. News, of course, like related to the clients and the projects. This, of course, is a section. It's a block of content large enough to sit on its own. It has important content such as what they've been posting. So it's specific enough to apply multiple and different pieces of content, but generic, but large enough to be its own thing. Now this isn't a section. This is a different tag, but we'll run over that after. So with a section, it defines a generic section of a document or application. So we just went over that. A section in this context is a thematic grouping of content. Again, we went over that. So you can see each of these is latest news, know more about us, our clients, our project, our service. Anything with this kind of style of heading, consider it always as a section. Now you can see that this doesn't have a heading, but its content thematically is all the same, and that's what we're looking for, thematic grouping of content. But it's also a generic section. We can call it something. We can call it workers, or we can call it employees or something. I don't know. So even though it doesn't have a heading, it's still a section of content grouped together thematically. Now, even though this is grouped together thematically, and it is pretty generic, it's still not really a section. It's not big enough to warrant itself being a large block of content that we want someone to stop on and read a lot of. Neither is this. So, thematic group of content. Each section should be identified, typically including a heading as a child of the section element. So, this is a heading. This is a heading. This is technically a heading. This is a heading. This is a heading. And this is a heading. And these are headings. These we help, we love, 30 years are all headings. So we're identifying using a heading. Okay, so now we know what a section tag is. Now let's actually open this section tag and put something in it. div, div. Now this has an opening and closing tag, so we're using this section as the parent of the div, and the div is the child of the section. So what's a div? The div element has no special meaning at all. It represents its children. It can be used with the class, language, title, and title attributes to mark up semantics common to a group of consecutive elements. So the div has no special meaning at all. That's the big one, is that we group content using a div. We group content because maybe we see this. Now this is, or let's do this actually. This is a whole section. This services is a whole section. We have the services and we have each service inside of it. We've defined this section with our heading, our service. We won't worry about the green line. But these are not their own section because we already have a section. We've already defined a generic piece of content. Now, a generic section of the document. Now, we want to specifically define our services in this area. So we have an icon, we have a heading, we have some text and a box. And we can see that it's repeated 6 times in total. So we're not going to do 6 section tags inside of our section. We're going to use a div because we want to, even though a div has no meaning, technically, on the page, it has a meaning to us as a developer. A div will 99% of the time act as a grouping of content. In this case, we're grouping together the image, this little icon, this heading, and the text. And then we can manipulate the div as well. So we would order our content like this in our div. So we would have an image here. We would have an H1 underneath of it, or an H2, sorry, a heading tag, and a paragraph tag, all in the div. But we can, even though that's all grouped inside of it, we can still do something to that div as well. This black, or this gray background, this gray box, it's not a an element inside of the div. It's a div. So the way we would do this is that we would use CSS to give a background color to this div. And so now anything inside of this div, let's just show you right now. Actually, let's just do an example. Now you can do this if you want. We're never going to use this again. This is just as an example. So if I do gray, I put my, I put an H1 in and it says, this is a test heading for the div. And now I put a P tag. Now the way I'm finishing these tags, by the way, is I press P and I hit tab. I press H1 and I press tab. The style tag, I'll explain it way later when we're doing CSS, but you can just put this in right now and make sure you put it in before the closing bracket of the opening div section. So you would put it right here. So now let's put something in the P tag. This is some test text for our paragraph tag. So now I save that and I'm on live server. So remember, if you want to do live server, let's dispose of this. And you could have seen it in action right there. We go live. We can see now that this is our div. This whole box, this whole gray box is our div. And it has a background color of gray. And that because we have an H1, a heading, and we have a paragraph inside of that div, it's also taking the background color of gray. Now, we can make this box infinitely huge. So if I copy and paste it a million times, everything inside of it still has the background color. So what you might be thinking to yourself is, how does a div act inside of a div? It works exactly how every other div works. It's a block of content. So if I now have a div here, it's its own block of content inside of another block of content. So now if I have an H1 here, and again, this is a test heading for our second div. Now, if I take this style and I change the color to red, I'm going to pause to let you think what might happen. There's a lot of things that could happen. Maybe the div doesn't change that color, actually. Maybe it just stays gray. Well, why would it stay gray if we've defined red? So maybe the next thought is, well, maybe the whole background is going to be red then. But then why do we still have gray? Well, great question. Because we have one top level div, it's still going to have the background color of gray. But now we have a new div that's defining a new set of content as a developer. As a viewer, it doesn't mean anything to us. But we can see that now this is red. Now the gray is still there. We can see if I pulled this up in Chrome, you can do this in Firefox as well. You right click and you can see all of your options, save as, print, and stuff. We go to inspect, and normally the way this pops up is that it pops up on the side or on this side. I don't like it here. If you prefer it on this side, go ahead. Docking it to bottom tends to be the better choice because when you're scaling your page, height doesn't matter as much as width. So if I right click my text and I inspect it, I can see that I am on my H1 tag now. Background color red is still it's here. We can see gray is still here too. Now let's turn off background color red in our element style. We can now see that the gray is here. Now it's not that red is overriding gray. It's that our second div is, because these act as nothing, the div doesn't work like, it doesn't stack, like it stacks, and it doesn't stack underneath of it. It stacks over top of stuff. So what if I now set the height of this? Again, we're not going to be using this kind of style after. Maybe now you can do this too. I set the height to 200 pixels. My gray is here now. And now you can tell that this top level div still exists, we have stuff inside of it. And so the stuff inside of it, we can edit entirely separately from this top div.